Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, it's been a good while since I did one of my fairly short but hyper nerdy videos. So it was overdue and today I'm going to do exactly that. Now last week I showed you this guitar here, my 2019 made in Japan Fender Jaguar, and I took it from its completely stock configuration to so-called perky spec and put some very fancy boutique gear in there. So Mojo hand-wound pickups, Descendant hardware, a complete rewire, paper and oil capacitors, close-on tuners, the works. I went to town on this thing, so check out that video if you want to see a before and after of MIJ spec versus what I've turned it into. But when I was putting the pickups in this guitar, something came to my attention and I went online to try and find a solution, and I think I kind of did. But I found out afterwards there's a much bigger debate around the entire topic. And that is essentially the pickups in the Fender Jaguar. Because these are strap-like to a point, but if you look closely they have a kind of cage around them with metal teeth sticking up. And the purpose of those, sort of the metal outside of the pickup, is not dissimilar to the base plate on a Tele bridge pickup. It's designed to kind of reflect the magnetic field up towards the strings for a slightly hotter output and a slightly more bitey, piercing tone. Now, if you look super closely at the pickups, you'll see that there's 4 big teeth and 2 short teeth. So when I was putting these pickups in, I was wondering which way around the pickups go. Which strings are the 2 shorter teeth underneath, the top E and B or the low E and A? So I went online, I found a photograph of a vintage Jaguar, and that had the 2 lower teeth on the low strings of the guitar. So that's what I did. I put them in there and assumed that's as it always was. But afterwards I was doing some reading and it is not quite as clear cut as that. So originally Leo Fender intended the 2 lower teeth to be, as per the photo I found, on the low E and A of the guitar. And that was essentially designed to tame the low end output because there's of course winding on the lower strings, they have a bit more kind of beef to them. So to balance out the sound of the guitar, having the slightly shorter teeth was supposedly to kind of take the output of the low E and A down a little bit and bring it more in line with the rest of the guitar. But slightly confusingly, when Leo sold the company to CBS at some point, I think in the late 60s, drew up a diagram of how to build a Fender Jaguar, and they pictured the pickups the other way around, with the 2 shorter teeth under the top E and B strings. Now, in reality, and I've done loads of reading on forums and people who are very knowledgeable about vintage Jaguars, so I've kind of done as much due diligence as I possibly can on this topic, but the end result is there wasn't actually any consensus at all, and Jaguars shipped from the factory with the pickups mounted every single way around, sometimes different ways between the bridge and the neck pickup in individual guitars. So whilst it might have been intended to have the 2 lower teeth on the low E and A strings, it wasn't always that in reality, even though that was kind of the original specification. Now, which is vintage correct is one debate, but the more important one, I think, is does it make a difference to the sound of a Fender Jaguar? Because in theory, having the 2 shorter teeth underneath the E and the A kind of takes the low end of the guitar down a little bit. But if you flip them and put the low teeth underneath the E and the B, then presumably it would tame the top end response a little bit and beef up the low end. So is there any sonic difference between mounting a Jaguar pickup one way versus the other? So today I'm going to put that to the test, because online nobody can decide on this. There doesn't seem to be any videos or any sort of substantial evidence out there looking into it somewhat scientifically. So I'm going to do my best to put that right today. So what I've done is I've set this guitar up with a very specific setup with measurements of the pickup heights relative to the strings. I'm going to play a few things through a clean amp and then a slightly crunchy amp. Switch the pickups, match the height of the pickups exactly, and then play the same things through the same amps and put the footage side by side to see whether there is any sonic difference whatsoever between the direction you orientate a Jaguar pickup. So, as I said, super nerdy, but hopefully this might put some of those forum arguments to bed once and for all. So, without further ado, folks, here we go. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath and let me know what you were hearing today, if anything. I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks down in the comments section. Now I've just edited the audio together and balanced the mics out and listened back to it over and over and over again. And I think there's two answers to this question. Firstly, I think, yes, there is a sonic difference between which way you mount the pickup. But the second answer is, it doesn't really make any big substantial difference whatsoever, because we are talking the most subtle of subtle changes. Now, I do think, having gone back and listened to the clips over and over, that in the kind of original configuration with the low teeth under the E and the A low strings, it does tame the low end a little bit, and it gives the guitar a slightly more bright and shrill top end. Flipping them round does have the opposite effect. It kind of takes a little bit of that brilliance off the top end and thickens up the low end a little bit. But again, that is so subtle, it is essentially not worth worrying about. Weirdly, I was hearing it more into the crunchy Friedman today than was to the clean Dr. Z. I was thinking, usually in these sorts of videos, the differences are more apparent into a clean amp, and then when you add gain, it muddies everything up a little bit and it sounds basically the same. I was hearing it slightly more into the Friedman, strangely, but I was hearing in the original configuration a slightly tighter low end and a more sort of on the top end. Flip it around, the low end was a little bit more beefy, and it was just rolled off slightly up the top. So what I think I'm going to do with this guitar, folks, Let's actually do a mixture of the two, because I like the CBS configuration on the bridge pickup. It fattens it up a little bit and just tames a bit of that brilliance. But I prefer the original orientation on the neck pickup because it tightens the low end up and has a little bit more bite to the top end. So I think I'm going to go for a hybrid approach and do a mixture of the two. But as I said, we are splitting the tiniest and thinnest of hairs here. There is essentially no difference between mounting it one way versus the other. But that's just my opinion, folks, so please do let me know yours. Was this video helpful? Did it help you decide on which way round you want the pickups in your guitar? I love chatting about all this sort of stuff with you folks in the comments section. So yeah, I hope this was useful for you and put some of the forum myths to bed. Please do let me know underneath what you think. I love getting your thoughts on the videos I make. So thanks folks, please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a big difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you very soon. Bye bye.